On today's show, the Rockets' defense and rebounding were MIA, and it was a rough night for Kevin Durant in this loss against the Jazz. We're going to break it all down for you right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Now, the number one sports podcast network. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Fridays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the Rockets' unfortunate 133-125 loss to the Utah Jazz, a game where they almost mounted a comeback. First set of back-to-back games this season. I'll tell you what, staying in Salt Lake City might do this to anybody 2 days in a row. Credit to the Jazz. They took this game a lot more seriously than the Rockets did on the second night of a back-to-back. And the Rockets certainly looked like a team playing on the second night of a back-to-back. And we're going to get into all the different, areas of this game, the issues with the defense and rebounding in this one, talk about Kevin Durant's rough night, silver lining of Alperen Sengun's play, Jae'Sean Tate, igniting that comeback off the bench. A lot to get to from this one. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right. 133-125, Rockets loss. I'll tell you what, Jazz fans are going to be excited to read about this one in the paper in the morning because they don't have internet in Utah. Shout out to Vernon Maxwell. God, it had to be the Jazz. God, I hate the Jazz so much. All right. 133-125 loss. And look, this game, losses like this are annoying because the Rockets just messed around in this game. They did. They flat out just didn't take the Jazz seriously, right? This was a team that less than 24 hours ago, well, I guess not less than 24 hours ago, approximately 24 hours previously, they just manhandled this exact same Utah Jazz team. And the only key difference in the two squads, well, two key differences, no Steven Adams for the Rockets, and Keyonte George clearly feeling a lot better for the Utah Jazz, posted 28 points after going 0 in the previous game. So Keyonte George, big bounce back game for him. He was getting downhill and carving through the Rockets' Swiss cheese defense like nothing. So there are a bunch of different areas that you can point to and reasons for this loss. I'm going to start with the more team-centric ones here in our first segment, and then I'll transition to talking about the rough night for Kevin Durant as we progress through the episode. But first and foremost, the Rockets got out-rebounded. And that's only happened once before this season, also in a loss to the Detroit Pistons. Jazz out-rebounded the Rockets 50-46, and they won the second chance points battle 24-20. And that being one of the areas that the Rockets usually dominate other teams and have a little bit of a built-in buffer win condition. Not being able to rely on that certainly hurt them, right? There were a few key possessions late in this game as the Rockets were mounting their comeback that were second chance opportunities that led to kick out threes for the Jazz to help kind of stifle the Rockets as they were mounting their comeback, trying to overtake the Jazz and reclaim the lead in this game. So the rebounding was certainly an issue. And look, you miss out on Steven Adams, the rebounding's certainly going to hurt. But weirdly enough, no Steven Adams, Clint Capela only winds up playing 9 minutes. And on the other side of it, Will Hardy and the Jazz just decided that they were going to play jumbo. And there were points where they had Kevin Love and Lauri Markkanen and Kyle Filipowski all on the floor at the same time, running a trio of bigs. And the Rockets barely even ran. I think they ran the double big with Capela and Sengun for a couple minutes, if that. If I'm maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe they didn't run it at all. But it was just weird to me that as good as Clint has been in the stretches, especially with no Steven Adams, when he's been the default backup big this season, that Ime didn't lean further into the double big dynamic, both for defensive purposes, but also to crash the glass and to generate some of those second and third chance opportunities. And, it's just weird that, that's been a weapon that the Rockets have used a lot this season. And Ime was just like, nah, I'm good. So that was a strange decision from the coaching side of things. So rebounding was one big key in this one. Also, just give credit to the Jazz because they shot the lights out of the ball in the second half. Rockets struggled in this game efficiency-wise. They only shot 44% from the floor, only 29% from three. Jazz were 50% from the floor, and then 40% from downtown. They hit 10 threes in the second half. And give them credit. I mean, they were carving up the Rockets defense, and they were generating some high-quality looks from three. So that's what happens when you don't take a team seriously. And this is, at the end of the day, it's the Jazz, and the Rockets should have won this game. But even if you give a bad team confidence, right? These are still the best players on the face of the planet. And even the worst team in the NBA these are still professional basketball players. This is still a professional basketball organization. And the Rockets messed around, and they gave the Jazz a ton of confidence, and they ran with that confidence in the second half. And even when they mounted their comeback, right, they were very close to knocking down the door and taking over this game. We'll talk about the almost comeback a little bit later in the show. But, the Jazz had enough belief in themselves at that point that they were playing with house money. They were playing with all that confidence, and they certainly looked like it, right? The Jazz took this win, and the Rockets, through a variety of different mistakes and lack of focus and poor execution and bad basketball IQ and bad decision-making down the stretch of this game, flat out probably just didn't deserve to win this one. This was a game where it was like, you know what? All right, you didn't play your best basketball. This is not the win for you. But the biggest and most egregious part of this game was probably the defense for the Rockets. This is a team that on paper coming into this game was the second best defense in the NBA. And it certainly didn't show in this one. And you can't just be like, oh, they didn't have Steven Adams, so their defense fell apart. Like, Steven Adams is not and should not be that integral to the Rockets' defensive structure. He's great. He's a big part of their defense, and he's very important to the fabric of this team. But one defense does not Steven Adams make. This was just a lack of effort and a lack of focus on their first back-to-back of the season. And I hate it feels like such reductive analysis to come down and basically say, well, it was their first back-to-back and they looked like it, but they did. I mean, like they looked like they had dead legs. Guys looked tired. They looked a step slow. And whenever you play the same team 2 games in a row, right? That team that lost the previous game is going to come out with a little extra fire, right? A little extra, like, hey, you're not gonna put one on us again on our home court. And this was a game where, unfortunately, right, defensively, everybody struggled in this game. It was a team affair, but the Jazz were also putting Reed Sheppard in every single action they could find him in. Like, they were flat out hunting Reed Sheppard. And this is the thing. And look, it's better that it happens now than it happening down the line in a 7-game playoff series. These are the things the coaching staff are going to have to figure out, is how do we scheme defensively around having Reed Sheppard on the floor, right? And there's certain things that they're going to be able to do, and there's certain things they're not going to be able to do. And it's up to Ime and the rest of his coaching staff to figure out, how can we be effective defensively? How can we still be an elite defensive team with Reed Sheppard out there on the floor? Golden State Warriors did it for years with Steph Curry, hiding him on defense, finding ways to game plan for him, specifically for teams trying to hunt Steph Curry defensively. Rockets need to peel out some of that old Golden State Warriors film and just look at how Steve Kerr and his coaching staff try to game plan around Steph Curry defensively, because the Rockets need to employ some of those same tactics for Reed Sheppard. I am not sitting here blaming all of the defensive issues on Reed Sheppard for this game. That is not what's happening. But if you watch this game with your own 2 eyeballs, you saw that the Jazz were targeting Reed Sheppard a ton. And it wasn't just that, right? Again, it was lack of effort, lack of rotations. I mean, at various points, guys were just getting, Keontae George just had open drives to the rim, what felt like all night long. It was just a rough game. Right? It was a rough game. The defense and rebounding were not what they need to be, and they're not what they are capable of being from this team. And that's the other frustrating part. It's just like, we know that this team is capable of so much more. And so when they play down to their level of competition, when they don't play up to their usual standards, it's frustrating, because this should have been an easy win. This should have been just another mop them up, rest all the guys in garbage time kind of win. And it wasn't. But you learn from it. You take a look at film, you figure out what went wrong, and you just chalk it up to a schedule loss potentially, and you move on to the next one. Not the weirdest loss in the association either, because the Nuggets also lost to the Mavericks, and there were a bunch of different upsets that took place around the league in this night. The Bucks got beat by the Wizards. There were a bunch of weird losses across the league. Lakers got beat by the Suns. I mean, it was a weird night. So coming up, I do want to talk about Kevin Durant's struggles in this game and how that related to some of the Rockets' struggles at large, trying to pick up their second win against the Jazz. And we'll also get into one of the silver linings from this game, a couple of the silver linings from this game, Alperen Sengun and then Jae'Sean Tate off of the Rockets bench. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props that update as guys heat up. You can bet on the next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every single possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL bets live all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, look, this was a game that, despite how poorly the Rockets had managed to play for a majority of this game, they were down by as many as 21. Right? Down by as many as 21. And they roared back at the end of that third quarter. They went on a 14-2 run to close out the third quarter. They started the fourth quarter down 9 after being down by as many as 21. And at the top of the fourth quarter, they kept chipping away. And to his credit, Kevin Durant was awesome in the fourth quarter. Kevin Durant was phenomenal in the fourth. He had 16 of his 32 points in that fourth quarter. And Alperen Sengun and the rest of the team, they tried as much as they possibly could to will themselves back into this game. But it was too little, too late. And by that point, right, the Jazz had all the momentum. They had all this belief in themselves that they were going to win this game. And they were able to, they had the responses that they needed. Whenever the Rockets got close, the Jazz had an answer. The Rockets at one point cut it to a one-possession game, a one-point game even. And after the Rockets cut it to a one-point game, the Jazz ripped off like an 8-1 run and got some breathing room when they were able to just keep the Rockets at arm's length and be able to, close out this game and finish it off. And part of that goes back to the defense, right? The Rockets just flat out couldn't get stops at the end of the game. And at that point, it wasn't even the fact that you had, Reed Sheppard out there anymore, who's benched to finish off this game, didn't wind up playing a single second of fourth quarter action. But this was one of those where, because the Jazz were rolling all night, the Rockets just did wind up not having an answer. Even once they put in their veteran, right, Aaron Holiday, to kind of make up for Reed Sheppard to have a more stable hand out there, it just didn't matter by the end of the game. And a big part of what happened late in this one that was super problematic was the series of fouls on Lauri Markkanen. There was a possession in the fourth quarter with, I want to say it was 5 fouls on one possession like Lauri Markkanen drew 3 straight fouls. I know that much, right? And these were just like kind of like physical bumping touch fouls, and the refs were just, Lauri Markkanen was just straight up like almost like pile driving into Rockets players and forcing the issue, and the refs were bailing him at call after call after call, and it rushed the Jazz into the bonus, which they wound up only getting 4 free throws like in the fourth quarter, but that little stretch was such a weird stretch of basketball, and it kind of like mucked up the game a little bit, and getting to the free throw line those couple times did give the Jazz just a little bit of breathing room there as the Rockets were trying to make their push and make their comeback. But they were still unconscious for 3. They hit 4 threes in the quarter. And ultimately, like, as much as the Rockets were trying to claw their way back into this game, they just didn't have enough. They didn't have an answer defensively for the Jazz. And realistically, as good as KD was in the fourth quarter of this game, and as good as Alperen Sengun was, it was the other quarters, in particular, kind of KD's first and third quarters were really rough. Only 2 for 7 in the first quarter, 2 for 8 in the third quarter. That's 4 for 15. And that is a far cry from KD's usual efficiency. 32 points, but it took him 25 shots to get there. And again, as awesome as he was in the fourth quarter, like, playing from behind like that is just so difficult. And this is something that we haven't seen a lot of from KD this season, because it really kind of felt like he was forcing a lot in this game. Whereas generally he's really unselfish with the ball, right? He's really looking to get other guys involved more often than not. And you look up and down the lineup and you see, well, Alperen Sengun had a stellar game, a masterclass game. We'll talk about his performance in a moment, but Amen Thompson, strong game in his own right. 23 points, 8 of 16 shooting, 8 boards, 3 assists. Overall strong game, had a couple monster blocks. But the role players really didn't have, I guess, the volume that they probably needed or should have had. Now, some of that you can equate to, okay, second night of a back-to-back. They were also tired. They were struggling. Jabari only took 9 shots. He was only 1 of 6 from downtown, unfortunately. Had 3 turnovers. And then Reed Sheppard, 3 of 8 shooting, but he hit 3 of 7 from downtown. So it's not like Reed was like just flat out missing all of his threes. He needed to get more of them up. And this is where I thought that, from the Rockets' perspective, with no Steven Adams off the bench and with Aaron Holiday struggling to hit in his own right, 10 points on 3 of 10 shooting, like, the Rockets just didn't get that usual spark that they get off their bench, right? Usually they can rely on, right? Usually they have Tari Eason and Steven Adams, and they stagger Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson throughout the game. And they can rely on, like, they have different guys who can step up over the course of a game. But in this one, with no Steven Adams and with Aaron Holiday kind of struggling and really kind of nobody else making an impact off the bench until Ime Udoka inserted Jae'Sean Tate for that brief stretch in the third quarter, you didn't get that usual bench spark that you need from this team. And this is just an unfortunate side effect of the fact that this team is super banged up right now. They're missing a ton of players. You're missing 3 legitimate starting quality rotation guys in Steven Adams, Tari Eason, and Dorian Finney-Smith. At this point, I'm going to stop holding my breath on DFS, because I don't know. We're probably not even going to see him until 2026 at this point, if he's still not doing any contact stuff. But no Adams, no Tari certainly hurts the Rockets' bench, their overall bench depth. And that's where you really felt it in a game like this, where it's second night of a back-to-back, rough night for Kevin Durant, and, a couple of the other role players, quieter evenings, or, rough, kind of a struggle game for Jabari as well a little bit. It would have been nice to be able to turn to some fresher legs on the Rockets bench in order to help offset, some of the struggles from the guys who played heavy minutes the night before. Although they didn't even, the thing is, I don't even feel like the back-to-back is a valid excuse, because they got plenty of rest in the game right before this one, because they blew out the Jazz and they didn't even wind up playing the fourth quarter, right? KD didn't play a single minute of the fourth quarter in the previous game. So using the back-to-back thing as like the schedule loss excuse in this one almost doesn't even feel like fair, because they got plenty of rest. I don't know. And it's their first back-to-back of the season. It's not like they've had some grueling, super intense schedule up to this point where they were exhausted. But a back-to-back is different. And I'll give them credit for that, right? It's like back-to-backs are hard. And then to go from an afternoon game into playing an evening game on mountain time, I don't know. There's a lot that you could gripe and moan about from this game. Ultimately, you kind of just want to ball it up and move on to the next one. Although I do want to highlight here the couple good silver linings from this game, in particular, Alperen Sengun, the stellar play from Jae'Sean Tate. He deserves some flowers for trying to get the Rockets back into this game. And then also Ime Udoka adjusting his substitution patterns. I want to talk about all that here coming up in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports, bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and even Texas. Prize Picks has added an extra layer of excitement to holiday sports scheduling this season. Create a lineup that takes less than a minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. You can choose from a huge range of unique stats, fantasy score rating, field goal attempts, free throws made, turnovers, whatever fits your strategy. And look, this season, when I've picked Alperen Sengun to go more on points, rebounds, and assists, like he did in this game, he hasn't disappointed yet this season. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, couple of the silver linings, the positives from this game. One being Alperen Sengun totally looks like himself again, which is great. Great news for the Rockets. Great news moving forward because he had a little bit of a rough game stretch there, right? But 31 points, 12 of 19 shooting, 1 of 3 from downtown, 6 of 8 at the free throw line, 8 rebounds, 14 assists, 2 steals, 5 blocks for Alperen Sengun. He had a play late in this game where he blocked it on one end and then got it back and scored it on the other end. Just superstar level stuff from Alperen Sengun in this one. And he was one of the few Rockets that it felt like he really showed up to play in this one. Now, much like the rest of the team, he still left a little bit to be desired defensively at times in this game. That was a whole team issue. Not pinning it on any one person. The Rockets as a team failed defensively in this one. And in particular for Alp, if I was going to gripe at him a little bit more, needed him to be a little bit more active on the glass, especially in the absence of Steven Adams, right? 8 rebounds. We know that Alperen Sengun's capable of doing a lot more work than that on the glass, right? But when he's shouldering such, a immense burden offensively, right? It's tough to ask him to do everything at an elite level, right? And so it's understandable that other parts of his game are going to struggle a little bit. And it's weird even saying 8 rebounds is a struggle. It's just, Alpy, just go out there and get a 30-point, 15 rebound, 15 assist game. Like, do that, or it's a bad game. Alperen, like that's what it feels like I'm saying. 14 assists, matching a career high for Sengun. And look, as bad as things were in this game, like, the Rockets did have some really stellar moments offensively where they were just flat out carving up the Jazz defense. It was just not enough and not consistent enough. And I do wonder why they ultimately don't use the Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun 2-man game a lot more often, because when they run with the ball in KD's hands, Alp sets the screen, KD gets the ball over the top to Alperen Sengun, and you have a Thompson roaming the baseline. That little 1-2-3 action is damn near unguardable. Rockets got so many good looks out of those simple actions where you just run high pick and roll between Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun, little 35 action, and then Alp gets the ball in the middle of the floor and then decides what to do with it, right? Whether the defense commits to him and then, he's got the easy lob over the top to Ime Thompson cutting the baseline, which he hit a couple of those in this game, or if somebody cheats in from the perimeter, then he kicks it out to a wide open shooter, be it Jabari Smith Jr., Sheppard, whatever. Like, that action should be the bread and butter of the Rockets offense, and they don't use it nearly enough for my liking because it's really good whenever they do it. I understand that like you also want to give like Sengun and KD their individual touches, their isolation touches, their post-up touches, and that is also a big part of the Rockets offense. But it's some of those sets outside of when those two had their hands on the ball, and in particular, the two stretches that were really bothersome in this game, to me in particular, were one, Ime Udoka tinkered with his rotations in this one, where usually he staggers Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun to where there's always one of them on the floor. And there was a stretch where he didn't have either of them on the floor in this game. And I thought that was peculiar. Trying to just find like trying to find a lineup where he could let Thompson be the focal point a little bit. And I unfortunately, it didn't feel like the right lineup to do that with Thompson, because ultimately, and we talked about this in the preseason, and we haven't really gotten a chance to see it in full force yet, but the best lineup for Thompson is going to be when the Rockets are fully healthy and they can run out a lineup of DFS, Tari, Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Durant. A 5-out, switch everything all the way across the board lineup. That's going to be the Rockets like death ball lineup. And it's going to be beautiful when we can actually see it in action. And you can even do like a poor man's version of it right now, where you swap out like DFS for, Aaron Holiday, or, once Tari Eason's back and healthy, like, I don't know, but there's just like the lineup out there with like Amin and Clint Capela and Josh Okogie was not the move. I mean, Okogie was a -15, and I don't know specifically how badly that lineup did while they were out there, but that lineup was out there for a chunk of the second quarter, and the Rockets got outscored in the second quarter 37-25. There was also the stretch where Kevin Durant was out there by himself and no Alperen Sengun with KD, and in that second quarter, that's where KD wound up, 2 of 4, I think, but 2 of 7 in the first quarter. I don't know. The Rockets offense does look very suspect at times without Alperen Sengun out there. Unfortunately, it's not quite Nuggets-esque where like when he steps off the floor, everything craters, but they do need to figure out some better ways to get some better looking offense when Sengun is off the floor. And a big part of that did have to do with not having Steven Adams out there, right? Because when Sengun usually sits, it's usually Adams out there manning the solo center minutes by himself. And Adams is an elite screener. He opens things up for KD, for Reed Sheppard, for other guys. He's an elite offensive rebounder, so he generates those second chance points. And so the Rockets are able to kind of survive and sometimes even thrive in those Steven Adams minutes where Sengun is off the floor because of what he brings to the table. And because Ime Udoka elected to not really lean on Clint Capela very heavily in this game, and I know Clint's a different type of big than Adams, I don't know. It felt different. And I'm not exactly sure why Ime elected to start tinkering with his lineups all of a sudden in this game. Maybe it was because it was the second night of a back-to-back and because there was no Steven Adams. But at least as far as just a baseline, it does feel like there should always be one of Sengun or KD on the floor at all times, because if you don't have either of those guys on the floor, that's when things do start to get really sticky for the Rockets offense, not having KD as a bailout, not having Sengun as your offensive engine, all that stuff. And no disrespect to him Thompson, right? Because he's had stretches where he's looked really, really good. It's just he's still not quite to the level of either of those two guys as far as being an offense unto himself, I guess, at this stage. Credit to Jae'Sean Tate for trying his best to will the Rockets back into this game. When Ime Udoka was looking for a spark, Jae'Sean Tate provided it. And frankly, I thought it was a misstep by Ime to not keep Jae'Sean Tate in the game after the end of the third quarter, because he came back at the top of the fourth with his starters plus Aaron Holiday. And I was like, dude, where's Jae'Sean Tate? Like, he, not single-handedly, but like Jae'Sean Tate was a big reason, the biggest reason that you got back into this game. Like, give the man his credit, let him stay on the floor. He deserves it. Like, he earned being on the floor. And I'm a firm proponent of, like, if you find a lineup that gets you back into the game, ride with that lineup as long as you realistically can, right? Similar to, shout out to, like, the Rockets of old when Kevin McHale kept James Harden benched in game 6 against the Clippers on the road, right? Like, that 5-man lineup had it figured out, and they brought the Rockets back and they won the game. And sometimes you just don't want to mess with the mojo of what's on the floor, the momentum of what you have out on the court at any given moment. And so I thought that was another misstep by Ime to switch up the lineup at the top of the fourth just because, oh, we're back within striking distance. Like, no, don't go back to the guys that got you in the hole to begin with. Like, the Rockets starters were the ones who weren't playing defense and who were struggling, who weren't they weren't taking the game very seriously. So I liked what we saw out of Jae'Sean Tate, and he's, that's one of those where you look at some of those stay ready crew guys, right? Jae'Sean Tate, Aaron Holiday, and right now Holiday's playing big, like, actual rotation minutes. But in a normal world where the Rockets were actually healthy and had these other serious contributors that they're missing, Adams, Tari, DFS, Tate and Holiday would be the guys that you could insert into a game fresh off the bench in that third quarter and then try and find life that way. But instead, right, Holiday's already playing big rotation minutes, has been. And so Jae'Sean Tate was the one, like, kind of break glass in case of emergency guy that you could go to that hasn't been getting regular rotation minutes. And he was a complete change of pace for this Rockets team. He came in, he played hard-nosed defense, he was generating extra opportunities. He got 5 offensive rebounds in 13 minutes of run. 5 of them. He had a third of the Rockets' offensive rebounds by himself. Like, that's the kind of infectious energy that the Rockets really needed more of in this game, and they just weren't getting it from anybody else. And it really felt like a mistake to not keep that energy on the floor in order to keep trying to mount that comeback and ultimately knock down the door and overtake the Jazz. But look, at the end of the day, you ball it up, you say, a loss is a loss. It was almost a comeback. It was almost a good little feel-good story there at the end. The Rockets had too many mistakes down the stretch of this one. Even when it was still, like, albeit maybe unlikely that they would win it, but even like when it was within striking distance there at the very, very end, right? You had like the Ime Thompson turnover where he drove it in too quickly and, pitched it to Keontae George right there in the corner. Rockets were only down 5. If they'd hit a 3 right there, down 5, you cut it to a 2-possession or a 2-point game, a 1-possession game. Anything can happen. We've seen crazier things happen at the end of an NBA game. So Rockets just turned it on a little bit too late. They didn't take the Jazz seriously. And, unfortunately, this team, as good as they've been, this was probably the most lackadaisical game that they've had all season, where they just trotted out and they were like, it's the Jazz. We just beat them, whatever. And it bit them in the ass. So you learn your lesson, you move forward, and you take every team seriously, at least until you're up about 25 or 30, and then you can start goofing off and slacking off on defense. I want your thoughts from this Rockets-Jazz game. Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. What stood out to you? What was the biggest issue to you in this game? Was it Kevin Durant's inefficiency? Was it the defense? Was it the rebounding? Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.